Welcome to qnawire.
In question 3, we're being asked to suppose that a fall in consumer spending causes a recession. Part A says, illustrate the immediate change in the economy using both an aggregate supply aggregate demand diagram and a Phillips curve diagram. On both graphs, label the initial long-run equilibrium as point A and the resulting short-run equilibrium as point B. What happens to inflation and unemployment in the short run? Well, let's go back to our old friend, the ADAS graph. On the x-axis, we have the quantity of output y. On the y-axis, we have the price level p. And as always, a downward sloping aggregate demand curve, upward sloping short-run aggregate supply curve, and a vertical long-run aggregate supply curve. So initially, I've drawn here on the left. You can see a lot of things going on, but let's concentrate on the intersection of AD1 and SRAS1. So the economy begins at point A at the longer run equilibrium and full employment. Now, there's a decline in consumer spending, which reduces aggregate demand and thus shifts the aggregate demand curve to the left from AD1 to AD2. So our new equilibrium point is the intersection of AD2 with SRAS1, point B. And as you can see here, this corresponds to a lower level of output Y2, and thus the difference between Y2 and Y1 is the recessionary gap. Now, as far as the Phillips curve, the short-run Phillips curve is concerned, we've drawn the diagram on the right. On the x-axis, we have unemployment level U. Y-axis is the inflation rate, which I denote with the Greek letter pi. The long-run Phillips curve is always vertical, and the economy is at the short-run Phillips curve, SRPC1. So let's think about it. What happens here? Um, the economy initially The movement of the aggregate demand curve along the short-run aggregate supply curve leads to a movement along the short-run Phillips curve, SRPC1. And since we're dealing with a recession, the economy goes from point A to point B. Moves along the short-run Phillips curve. Doesn't shift. The Phillips curve doesn't shift at this point because this is an aggregate demand shock. And to draw a parallel line comparing the two diagrams, this is basically the same side, the different side of the same coin. So the lower price level in the aggregate supply aggregate demand curve, which is P2, right? We're going from P1 to P2, corresponds to deflation, and thus on the right hand side corresponds to the pi 2 level of inflation. And likewise, the lower level of output Y2 in the aggregate supply aggregate demand curve corresponds to the higher unemployment rate in the Phillips curve, right? We're moving from U1 to U2. Okay, part B of the question says, now suppose that over time expected inflation changes in the same direction that actual inflation changes. What happens to the position of the short-run Phillips curve? After the recession is over, does the economy face a better or worse set of inflation unemployment combinations? Well, that's now that we have our diagram, that's not very difficult to answer. As expected inflation falls over time, the first thing that happens is that the short run aggregate supply curve shifts down, right? From AS short run AS1 to short SR AS2. Why this happens is because the firms, like, consumers have reduced their inflation expectations, so firms realize that they will need to lower prices, so they're not going to produce more. Actually, they're going to supply it less, right? So this is what causes the shift of the short-run aggregate supply curve downwards. So now the economy is back to its long-run equilibrium in terms of output. The new intersection of the aggregate demand and aggregate supply is point C. This is back to the natural level of output, but however, inflation falls even more. The price level falls even more over time and goes down to P3 on the left-hand side. On the right-hand side now, the economy, the new set of inflation expectation causes the short-run Phillips curve to move downwards, right, to drop, and now the economy is facing SRPC2, and the unemployment level goes back to normal, to its long-run equilibrium, and the inflation rate also drops to pi 3. Now, after the recession is over, excuse me, after the recession is over, the economy faces a better set of inflation unemployment combinations, right? If we look at SRPC2, now for each level of unemployment, inflation will be lower. Or you can put it another way, for the same level of inflation, unemployment will be lower. And this is what happens when the economy moves back to its long run equilibrium after a recession.